tell you something before we go on? I did not have any grand plan. I just had that Chapel Hill note clearing my name, and a county that could not keep its mouth shut. Once folks get a new piece of talk, it moves on its own. Word moved through Cabarrus County the way water moved through that branch below the sycamore. It found its own level, and it carried more with it than anybody intended. By the time that note from Chapel Hill passed through a couple of hands and made it to the general store, it had shed the language of laboratory glass and careful proof and taken on a shine of its own. Men leaned against barrels and started calling it college-tested. Somebody laughed that the professors up there must not have much else to do if they were sampling liquor from down this way. Folks made a joke out of it, but underneath the joke was something sharper. It was validation from a place that did not usually bother itself with our kind of problems. For once, rumor had been forced to sit down in front of proof. I was in the yard measuring feed when Cass Walker came up the drive, dust rising behind his car in a slow, deliberate trail. The Walkers had come up that same drive before. Years earlier, when the farm was in trouble, Cass's daddy had gone into business with Lula May in a way he would not have wanted spoken of in church. Lula May kept the figures on it all, and when he tried to lean harder than she liked, she used those same figures to get clear of him and keep the place in her own hands. He never forgave that. Cass drove faster than Eli ever did. Eli drove like the road might report him back to his daddy, but Cass drove like the road belonged to him. His car was newer too, paint still holding some shine despite the red clay that settled on everything in Cabarrus County. Looking at him, I could see the old likeness plain enough. Walker men had a way of arriving as if they were bringing help, when half the time what they meant to bring was a claim. It was a day or two after the Chapel Hill report when he showed up at the barn. He stepped out without haste and closed the door with a firm hand, the kind of motion a man makes when he expects things to mind him once he lays hold of them. I knew he was used to being watched. I had seen him before around church. His clothes were cut a little sharper than most, and his hat sat at an angle that said he knew how it looked. There was nothing theatrical about him, but there was calculation in the way he held himself, like every exchange was measured for advantage before he stepped into it. I knew his name before he ever spoke it to me. His people and ours had brushed up against each other in the old stories, and folks learned early in life that land and money rarely share a quiet table. Cass leaned one shoulder against the fence post, like he was only stopping by to pass the time. He said he heard I had something looked at by experts, and that he was interested in learning more about that. I did not ask how he heard. Questions like that are foolish in a county like ours. I told him he had heard right, that it had been tested and the result came back clean. He repeated the word clean, nodded once, and let the silence sit there just long enough to suggest he had come for more than confirmation. Afternoon light caught the edge of his jaw, and I remember seeing a faint crease near his mouth, like a man weighing how much to show. Then he said what he really came to say. He told me he moved that product and glanced over his shoulder like he was not sure we were alone. I told him only Backlash was with me. He smirked, slipped a toothpick into the corner of his mouth, and said he did it quietly. He had a regular route out as far as the start of Montgomery County. Folks knew him, he said, and did not ask too many questions about the source. They trusted him. I kept my hand on the feed scoop and waited while the chickens scratched near my boots like negotiations did not exist. He said I did not need to be riding around with jars under my arm, not when there was a better way. He smiled wide after he said that, and I wondered if he had been watching me. I thought about that first sale, the careful ride at dusk, and the coins in my pocket that had felt insultingly light. I thought about the number that kept sitting behind my ribs, and the way days slid by whether I made use of them or not. I understood what he was saying, so I asked him what his rate was. Cass did not hesitate. He said $7 a gallon, flat. He would pick up, handle the rest, and there would be no haggling and no half-paid porch deals. $7 a gallon was a fair deal, or fair enough, and he even said I could ask anybody. We both laughed at that. I ran the math quick in my head, translating jars into gallons into weeks. It was not generous, but it was steady. Steady had its own appeal when a deadline was posted in courthouse ink. I asked him if that was the standard rate. If we asked anybody, He gave a slight smile, not wide enough to be friendly and not thin enough to be cruel, and said, standard enough. I knew better than to press too far without proof. I had product, but no reach, heat, but no network. That Chapel Hill note had cleared my liquor of harm, but it had not built me a line into town. What I was doing was still illegal in the state and in the whole country. I told him 7 was fine, and that he could come after dark. I had about 2 gallons ready to go. He tipped his hat like the decision pleased him and offered his hand. I was not used to a man offering me a handshake in that kind of bargain, but I took it. We agreed on the price and the hour, and then he patted his thighs with both hands and got back in his car. When he drove away, the dust rose and left a haze that gave the pasture a rust-colored glow. I stood in the yard a moment longer, listening to the chickens and the wind through the sycamore leaves. It did not feel triumphant. It felt necessary, and I wondered if Lula May had felt the same way. That night I gathered jars from the second run and lined them in the barn, careful, glass clinking soft when they touched. Lantern light bent through the clear liquor and threw faint reflections against the boards. I counted them, not out of doubt, but out of discipline. If you are going to hand your life over in pieces, you need to know the exact count of what you are giving. Cass arrived like he said he would. His headlights dimmed before he reached the house, and he cut the engine short of the barn so he could roll the last few feet in quiet. He worked efficiently, lifting jars with a practiced grip and settling them into wooden crates, padded with cloth. He did not sample and he did not question. He trusted the Chapel Hill note more than he trusted my word, and I understood that kind of trust is not personal. It is transactional. Before he shut the trunk, he said I would hear it if folks complained. He did not expect it, but Lake Baden was a far spell from Mount Pleasant. I told him I was not worried about complaints, though I was. Truth was, I knew I could get in trouble for more than just complaints about corn liquor. He paused then, just a moment, and said demand was higher than usual. With a sly little smile, he admitted he had been selling my liquor before we ever talked. In his defense, he said folks liked to know what they were getting. Educated consumers, he called them. At the time, I took that for good news. To me, demand meant speed toward the lean. I did not yet understand what demand meant to a man like Cass. The first week moved quick, and when he came a second time, I decided I needed to move out of the barn. Money came back folded and counted, not extravagant, but steady. I laid it out one evening on our kitchen table, bills flattened under my palm, while Mama stood by the stove pretending she was only watching supper. She asked, quiet, if I was close to the amount. I told her it was close, but time had not slowed. That night at supper, Daddy sat at the end of the table with his spectacles low, reading a church bulletin, like it had more comfort in it than any person in that house. He did not look up at first. When he finally did, his gaze moved from Mama's face to mine, and back again. I was sure she had not told him what I was doing, but he said money moved faster than land, and not to mistake one for the other. I told him I did not. Then I knew Mama had told him, and he must have agreed, though I still do not know why. Over the next days, I built the first partial payment. I added bills as they came in and counted until the stack felt substantial enough to matter. When I placed it in front of my father, the air tightened in the room like the walls knew we were stepping into something that could not be taken back. Daddy looked at the money and said it would not be enough. He looked at me with a face clean as a line of clothes on the line. He did not get mad, and he did not ask. He just looked at me, and for a moment I was not sure what to do. Then I told him it shortened the distance. He gathered the bills slow, aligning the edges before slipping them into his coat. The next morning, he would hand them across a counter to a clerk, who would note the balance and the deadline without sympathy. I knew the remaining figure down to the cent. I did not need anybody to repeat it back to me. After that, my days stretched out long. I rose before dawn and worked the fields with Daddy. I worked the barn through the heat of afternoon. At night, I banked fires by lantern light, while Mama pretended not to hear the faint clink of glass. The barrels turned in rotation, 2 larger ones and a smaller cask, cycling through ferment and run, each batch yielding more as my hands grew steadier and my eye got sharper. The work carved new calluses into my palms and lines into my shoulders, but it did something else too. It narrowed my mind to what mattered. The number began to shrink in increments, slowly but surely, and what I did not know then, what I could not have known without stepping into Cass's world, was what he was doing with my name and that Chapel Hill note. I did not know he was widening his own margin, telling folks who cared to know about that endorsement like it was a seal stamped on every jar. I did not know he was charging more per gallon than he paid me, because demand allowed him that freedom. To me, the arrangement stayed simple: $7 a gallon, steady pickups, time converted into currency. The land did not comment. The sycamore shed bark the way it always had. The barn held heat and shadow in equal measure. In the quiet spaces between fire and drip and counted bills, I let myself feel a brief, private satisfaction. Lula May's arithmetic still held, or so I believed then. Copper and patience could still answer a posted notice, even when that notice wore official ink, and the world beyond the pines pretended to be civilized.